Okay, today we begin with a quiet invitation. Not to be inspired, not to be dazzled, but to be honest with ourselves. What does success look like to you? A standing ovation? A life-changing moment? A viral breakthrough? We are trained to believe in the magic of the moment, the big win, the sudden shift, the transformation that happens overnight. We glorify acceleration, we hunger for breakthrough. But what if success doesn't come with fireworks? What if it whispers? The Stoics offer us a different lens, one that does not rely on spectacle. They suggest that success is not something we stumble upon. It's not a fortune we find or a blessing we inherit. It's not even a destination. It's a habit, an invisible process, a quiet alignment between what we value and how we live. And perhaps most powerfully, it is something we practice, not something we achieve. In our time together today, we'll wander through the textures of this idea. We'll sit with emperors and former slaves, walk the ruins of ancient cities, trace the brushstrokes of Japanese tea masters, and peer gently into our own distracted, digital lives. All with one purpose: to understand how the Stoic mind trains itself not toward greatness, but toward steadiness. Because in Stoicism, success is not an event. It is the result of showing up the right way repeatedly. You may find by the end that the Stoic definition of success has little to do with triumph and everything to do with inner freedom. So let us begin not with ambition, but with attention. Let us not chase the moment that changes everything, but the habit that quietly changes you. And let us do so not with urgency, but with care. This is not a motivational video. This is not about hustle. This is a meditation on the kind of discipline that survives storms, outlives applause, and asks nothing in return except that you return again and again. Welcome to a different way of seeing success. Imagine this. Before the world awakens, before voices rise and distractions crowd the air, you are already awake. You move slowly, not out of laziness, but out of intention. There is no noise in the room, only the soft breath of your presence. You sit down with a pen or a book, not to produce, not to perform, but to return to yourself, to clarity, to what matters. It seems simple, perhaps even dull. But this is where Stoicism locates the origins of greatness, not in the peak moments that define a story, but in the steady rituals that define a soul. And perhaps no life embodies this better than that of Marcus Aurelius, a man burdened with the vast machinery of empire who still carved out time every morning to write not to the Senate, not to the people, but to himself. In what we now call the Meditations, Marcus did not deliver decrees. He reminded himself how to live. He was not creating a system for others to follow. He was whispering truths to his own wavering mind. Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. He wrote not as advice to the world, but as correction to his own inner impulses. His greatness, then, was not rooted in conquest or command, but in repetition, in the quiet, invisible labor of returning to the same principles every single day, and this daily effort was not glamorous. There were no awards for writing another line of philosophy at dawn. There were no headlines for breathing deeply instead of reacting in anger. For the Stoics, this was the only kind of success that truly mattered. The kind you build alone, in silence, with no audience and no applause. The modern world often teaches us to chase highlights. We crave breakthroughs, victories, dramatic change. But Stoicism reminds us that what shapes our character is not what happens once in a lifetime, but what happens every day. The habits we keep in the quiet are more powerful than the goals we chase in the spotlight. Every action we repeat, every response we choose, every intention we affirm becomes a thread in the fabric of who we are. And if those threads are weak, driven by impulse or ego, then no amount of success will hold. But if they are strong, woven with discipline, clarity, and integrity, then even hardship cannot unravel us. This is the paradox at the heart of Stoic practice, that freedom is not found in doing whatever you want, but in consistently choosing what is right. Repetition in this sense is not a constraint, it is a path to inner sovereignty. When you choose to return each day to the same grounding habits, reading, writing, reflecting, you are not limiting your freedom. You are cultivating it. Freedom without direction is simply chaos. And the Stoic, more than anything, seeks to live deliberately. Even small habits can carry this weight. Consider the simple act of making your bed each morning. There's nothing particularly impressive about it. It takes less than a minute. But that small decision, repeated day after day, becomes a declaration. I begin my day with order. I act with care. That mindset echoes into everything else. The Stoics knew this. Their understanding of habit was not mechanical, it was moral. Habit, for them, was not a hack for efficiency. It was a mirror of the soul. Who you are is not what you feel in moments of inspiration. Who you are is what you repeat when no one is watching. Aristotle, though not a Stoic, understood this deeply when he wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. The Stoics would have agreed wholeheartedly, because repetition is the training ground for virtue. It is where courage is built in small decisions, where wisdom is cultivated in small reflections, where patience is earned in the dull hours no one sees. Even Epictetus, born a slave and later one of the most influential Stoic teachers, taught that we must practice our values like musicians practice scales, not once but daily, for life. Because life, he said, will not always give you time to think. You must be ready to act. And readiness is built on repetition. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations to impress us. He wrote them because he knew how easy it was to forget, to drift, to act without intention. And so he returned every day to remind himself. That is what a habit is, a reminder in motion. Something that pulls you back toward what matters, no matter how far you've strayed. This daily rhythm is not exciting, it is not heroic. It is not content, but it is powerful. And over time it becomes the architecture of a life that can endure anything. So, as you move through your own day, brushing your teeth, answering emails, preparing food, ask yourself, what am I rehearsing? Who am I becoming through these small repetitions? Even the most ordinary moment can be a seed of greatness if done with attention. The Stoics ask us not to wait for our lives to be grand. They ask us to make our lives grounded. And that, they believed, is how you build success, not by reaching for it, but by living it one habit at a time. To understand Stoic discipline not as theory but as lived experience, we must leave behind the marbled halls of emperors. Instead, we enter a humbler space, a small, sparsely furnished room with nothing to call one's own. Here lived Epictetus, not yet a philosopher but a slave. Born around 50 CE in what is now Turkey, Epictetus entered the world not with privilege but in chains. He belonged to someone else. His body was not his own. He could be ordered, punished, sold. He had no name that mattered. And yet, what he did possess, what no one could take, was his mind. From the very beginning, Epictetus seemed to understand that while many things lie outside our control, our capacity to choose how we respond to pain, to injustice, to fate is something no chain can bind. This insight, so central to Stoic thought, was not abstract for him. It was survival. He lived it every day. According to tradition, his owner was cruel and at one point twisted Epictetus's leg so violently that it broke. "I warned you it would break," Epictetus reportedly said, not in anger, but in acceptance. He limped for the rest of his life, but he never called himself a victim. Instead, he became a student not only of philosophy, but of self-mastery. Eventually, he gained his freedom and opened a small school in Nicopolis, a coastal town in western Greece. He owned almost nothing, wore simple clothes, and lived with what others might call poverty, but what he would have called clarity. He did not ask for comfort, he asked only for the opportunity to train the mind. For Epictetus, philosophy was not a set of lectures or polished arguments. It was a discipline of practice, one that required effort, honesty, and the willingness to see oneself clearly. He told his students, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." He taught that the world may insult you, misjudge you, ignore you. That illness may come, wealth may vanish, loved ones may leave. But what you do with those experiences, how you interpret them, how you act in response is entirely yours. This was the heart of his teaching, that external events do not disturb us. Our judgments about them do. Pain, loss, discomfort, these are inevitable, but suffering is optional. It is not things themselves that disturb us, he said, but our opinions about them. This principle, though simple on the surface, becomes transformative when applied to daily life. Imagine, as he once asked his students to imagine watching your favorite cup fall and shatter. You feel anger or sadness, not because the cup broke, that's just physics, but because you expected it to last forever. Change the expectation, and the emotion changes too. That is why, for Epictetus, the discipline of the mind was everything. The training ground was daily life. And the tools were not grand philosophies, but small, repeatable exercises in self-awareness. He urged his students to monitor their impressions, those first immediate reactions to events, and question them. Not to suppress emotion, but to investigate it. To pause, to reframe, to ask, is this truly in my control? If not, then why am I disturbed? In this way, Epictetus brought Stoicism down to earth. He taught in plain terms, often using metaphors from everyday life. Life, he said, is like a banquet. Take what is passed to you with grace. Life is like a game of dice. You do not choose the role, only how you play it. Life is like a role in a play. You do not pick the part, but you can choose to perform it well. And he lived as he taught. Even when his school became respected, even when students came from Rome to hear him speak, Epictetus did not seek fame. He did not accumulate wealth. He remained committed to the inner work, what he called prohairesis, the rational faculty that allows us to choose in accordance with nature and virtue. For him, true success was not escaping hardship. It was becoming the kind of person hardship could not corrupt. A person who did not fear misfortune because they had already chosen their values. A person who did not crave praise because they already knew what was right. A person whose dignity did not depend on their situation, and perhaps that is why his legacy endures. Epictetus offers us a kind of heroism not based in conquest, but in consistency. Not the triumph of power, but the triumph of restraint. He did not teach us how to win battles, but how to withstand loss. How to be steady in the face of chaos. How to remain ourselves when everything else is taken away. In a society that often equates success with dominance, career titles, public recognition, wealth, Epictetus invites us to consider a different standard. That success is the ability to remain at peace in a world that cannot promise peace. That it is the capacity to hold your principles even when no one else does. That it is, above all, a life lived in alignment with reason, nature, and integrity. And that kind of success, Stoic success, is not found in extraordinary moments. It is built slowly, through repetition, through waking each day with the intention not to control the world, but to govern the self. Not to escape discomfort, but to endure it wisely. Not to chase approval, but to embody clarity. Epictetus, the once forgotten slave, became one of the clearest voices in the history of philosophy. Not because he reached the top, but because he looked inward. And there, in the stillness, he found a kind of freedom no master could give or take away. To walk the ancient streets of Nicopolis today is to walk through silence. Stones lie scattered like forgotten syllables of a language once spoken fluently. Olive trees sway gently in the sea breeze, their roots tangled in the ruins of a city that once pulsed with thought. Few travelers come here, fewer still know its significance. But for those who study the life of Epictetus, this quiet coastal town holds a profound and nearly sacred resonance. Because here amid the worn columns and weathered foundations stood the place where one of the greatest minds in Stoic philosophy taught others to train not the body, but the soul. After gaining his freedom, Epictetus settled in Nicopolis not to retreat from the world, but to create a space for contemplation within it. He opened a small philosophical school, not a grand academy with pillars and prestige, but a modest dwelling where young men came not for comfort, but for challenge. This was not an institution of theory, it was a place of practice, a gymnasium for the mind. And like all true disciplines, it demanded repetition, effort, and humility. What makes this place remarkable is not just its historical significance, but what recent archaeology has revealed about its spirit. In the early 2000s, excavations near the ancient agora unearthed a collection of ceramic fragments, small, broken pieces of pottery once used by students and citizens alike. But these were no ordinary household items. Inscribed on their surfaces were brief phrases, terse and sharp, etched in Greek with a steady hand. These inscriptions, now called the Epictetia Fragmenta, contain teachings unlike anything commonly found on domestic wares. They were not recipes, not trade records. They were Stoic meditations. Scholars believe these shards were more than artifacts. They were tools, portable reminders, exercises in daily reflection. Perhaps carried in tunics, perhaps placed on bedside shelves, perhaps recited during morning walks. They were the ancient equivalent of a mental note, an anchor to principle amid the storm of daily life. This discovery reshapes how we imagine Stoic education. It wasn't confined to lofty dialogue. It wasn't locked in scrolls or elite lectures, it was embedded in the mundane. These ceramic slivers suggest a pedagogy of presence, a way of scattering philosophy throughout one's day like seeds, letting them take root through sheer proximity and familiarity. Stoic practice, then, was not something reserved for special occasions. It was meant to be lived, carried, repeated until the words stopped being reminders and started becoming reflexes. One can picture the students of Epictetus rising early, brushing off the sleep of the previous night, perhaps walking barefoot across cool marble stones, their fingers brushing these fragments as they whispered the phrases under their breath. These weren't just lessons, they were incantations. Not mystical, but mental. Each one a tiny chisel tapping at the stone of the self, shaping it not with force, but with consistency. And this idea that profound change comes not from inspiration, but from integration is echoed again and again in Stoic thought. What matters is not how clever the philosophy is, but how deeply it penetrates your actions. In Nicopolis, this depth was cultivated not through grand arguments, but through the humble ritual of returning to the same simple truths over and over. There is something almost monastic about it. A life structured not around productivity, but around presence. The architecture of the school itself, as reconstructed through partial foundations and literary references, reflects this ethic. Rooms were modest. There were no statues, no adornments. The beauty was in the discipline. The goal was not to impress, but to practice. To embody, students were expected not just to listen, but to live the teachings. Meals were simple. Schedules were strict. Discussions were direct. The entire design of the place was aimed at one outcome: to build people who could endure reality without distortion or despair. In this way, Nicopolis functioned less like a school and more like a forge. Students arrived as they were restless, confused, reactive, and through repeated exposure to the Stoic method, they began to transform. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, like a stone shaped by wind. Through habit, through reflection, through repeated reminders etched in thought and clay alike, they began to craft a self that could remain unmoved in a world always shifting. Even today, standing amid the ruins, one feels this spirit. Not just the presence of a past civilization, but the residue of intentional living. The fragments found here are more than artifacts. They are evidence that people once believed their thoughts could be trained like muscle. That inner peace was not a gift, but a practice. That greatness was not loud, but regular. For the modern viewer, the image is quietly powerful: young men of antiquity kneeling in dust, murmuring lines not to impress others, but to calibrate their minds. No social media, no likes, no audience, just the inner work done again and again until it becomes who they are. And perhaps that is the true gift of Nicopolis, not just its history, but its invitation. An invitation to scatter fragments of clarity throughout our own day. A reminder that we too can train the mind in small moments. That we too can choose phrases to carry with us, repeat them quietly, and slowly rewire the way we respond to life. The ruins may crumble, the pottery may break, but the habit remains. That is how Stoic thought survives, not in libraries, but in lives. Not in breakthroughs, but in repetition. And not in the extraordinary, but in the way we treat the ordinary with attention, with purpose, with grace. Across time and continents, different cultures have sought the same quiet strength, the power of a person who is unmoved by chaos, who acts with grace not once but always. In this pursuit, the ancient Stoics were not alone. Thousands of miles east of Rome, across mountains and seas, another tradition was unfolding, one that shared this reverence for discipline, repetition, and inner mastery. The samurai of Japan, though born from a very different cultural soil, lived by principles that echo the Stoic ideal. Where the Stoics had logos and virtue, the samurai had bushido, the way of the warrior. But both paths led to the same destination: self-command. For the samurai, every action, no matter how small, was a chance to align with something larger than the self. From the precise folding of garments to the careful placement of a sword, every gesture was ritual, every detail a meditation. A life structured around constant readiness, not just for battle, but for death. To live fully meant to accept mortality completely. Just as Epictetus taught that we should rehearse death daily, the samurai bowed to it at dawn, sharpen their swords not only for protection, but as an act of mindfulness. The blade, like the mind, must not be dulled by comfort. There is a phrase in Japanese culture, ichigo ichi, one time, one meeting. It reflects the idea that each moment, each action, each encounter is unique and unrepeatable. Therefore, it must be honored. In the Stoic lens, we hear a similar call, memento mori, remember that you must die. Both cultures, separated by centuries and geography, developed systems for remembering the fragility of life, not to fear it, but to sharpen their attention toward it. In this heightened awareness, the mundane becomes sacred. Making tea, cleaning a blade, tying sandals, these are no longer chores. They are rituals of refinement. Discipline in this context is not repression, it is liberation. The samurai did not follow rules because they were forced to. They followed them because within the ritual was clarity, and within clarity, freedom. The Stoics said the same. Only the disciplined man is free, wrote Seneca. Without inner control, we become slaves to impulse, to distraction, to fear. But with it, even a life of hardship becomes a life of meaning. The rituals of the samurai were often physical, visual, poetic, but behind them was the same structure of habit the Stoics revered. The early morning sword drills, the silent seated meditation, the sparring sessions in winter cold, these actions were not designed to produce immediate results. They were repetitions, each one carving a deeper groove in the character. And like the Stoic practices of journaling, self-questioning, and voluntary hardship, they built a person who could meet life on its terms without flinching. The deeper one looks, the more parallels emerge. In the Japanese tea ceremony, or shenoyu, a host spends hours preparing a space that will be used for mere minutes. Each movement, pouring, whisking, serving, is choreographed with care. But the point is not efficiency, it is presence. The guest does not sip the tea to taste it, they sip to be with it. The room is silent. The mind is still. The ceremony is a mirror. It reflects how well one has learned to dwell in the moment. Marcus Aurelius would have understood. You could leave life right now, he wrote. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Both the Stoic and the samurai aimed to make the present moment complete unto itself. Even the training of the samurai's body mirrored the Stoic training of the soul. Both involved embracing discomfort. The Stoic might sleep on the floor, walk barefoot, or fast not for punishment, but for practice. The samurai, too, would train in the rain, in heat, in silence. The aim was never to become hardened in appearance, but to become unwavering in essence. To practice not just swordplay, but kokoro heart-mind unity, an inner stillness that no opponent could shatter. One of the most striking parallels lies in the relationship between discipline and beauty. Both Stoics and samurai saw elegance in restraint. The Stoic avoided unnecessary luxury. The samurai polished his blade not for display, but because excellence required attention to the smallest detail. Each act done well was a step toward wholeness. Both traditions understood beauty is not something added on top of life. It emerges when life is lived rightly. We often associate greatness with grand achievement, but here we find a different model, one rooted not in outcomes but in process. The Stoic who returns to his journal, the samurai who sharpens his sword, they are not waiting for history to remember them. They are building themselves for the sake of the building. The repetition is not a means to an end. It is the end. Because who you become in that repetition is the goal. In today's world, which celebrates efficiency, speed, and spectacle, these traditions offer a quiet counterweight. They whisper that strength is not about domination, it is about alignment. That a meaningful life is not found by chasing more, but by repeating the essential until it transforms you. Whether in a Roman journal or a Kyoto garden, the principle remains. Success is not a leap. It is a step taken over and over carefully, consciously, and with devotion. So the question is not how much we can achieve, but how deeply we can inhabit what we already do. Can we fold our clothes with presence? Can we speak with measured tone? Can we approach each task, no matter how ordinary, as a form of inner training? The Stoics and the samurai would answer, yes, not only can we, but we must. Because in those small, disciplined actions, a self is formed that no storm can undo. In the modern world, we are constantly surrounded by stories of sudden transformation, overnight success, viral fame, the magical turning point that changes everything. A startup explodes into a billion-dollar company. An unknown artist becomes a global sensation after a single video. A person wakes up one day and, with one bold leap, reshapes their life entirely. These stories are captivating because they offer escape. They speak to a hunger in us for meaning, for momentum, for something decisive that breaks through the slow grind of daily life, but these stories are often illusions. What appears as a sudden rise is almost always the visible tip of a long, invisible structure, years of repetition, countless hours of quiet labor, days filled with small, unremarkable choices that no one saw and no one praised. This is the truth that Stoic philosophy insists we remember. Success is not an eruption. It is an accumulation, a slow burn, a process so consistent and so subtle that it is easy to overlook. We are living in an age defined by stimulation. Every moment, a new notification buzzes, a new headline flashes, a new shortcut is offered. Technology trains us to expect instant results, immediate rewards, and constant novelty. But the mind, the soul, does not evolve at the speed of software. Human growth, real growth, still follows ancient rhythms. It requires silence, patience, practice, and above all, repetition. The Stoics warned us about this temptation toward speed. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." In chasing the dramatic, we imagine that something out there, a breakthrough, a moment, a result will finally make us whole. But the Stoics believe that wholeness is not something we find. It is something we build, slowly, internally, through steady alignment between thought and action. Modern culture often associates discipline with rigidity or deprivation. But in Stoicism, discipline is not about controlling life. It is about preparing for it. The athlete who shows up to train every day, even when they feel tired or unseen, does not do so for applause. They do it to meet the moment when it arrives, not with panic, but with readiness. Not by chance, but by habit. The same is true of the mind. If you want clarity under pressure, you must rehearse calm when things are quiet. If you want to act with integrity when it's difficult, you must practice honesty in the moments no one notices. These are not dramatic acts. They are quiet repetitions. And they build not just competence, but character. Consider the Olympic athlete. The crowd sees only the final raise, the sprint, the dive, the dismount. But behind that single moment lies a decade of early mornings, sore muscles, and incremental improvements. The Stoics would call this ascesis training. Not punishment, but preparation. A conscious choice to shape oneself through effort so that when life tests us, we are already strong. The danger of modern life is not that we lack opportunity, but that we lose focus. Surrounded by so many distractions, we forget how to pay attention. We crave novelty, but we ignore depth. We want transformation, but resist routine. Stoicism gently reminds us, it is not novelty that changes you, it is repetition. Practiced with care. Practiced with purpose. Even our digital culture, with its relentless emphasis on speed, offers a strange mirror to the Stoic message. The algorithms reward what is loud and sudden, but what endures. What holds weight over time. Not the flash of virality, but the voice that returns consistently, offering something of substance. Even here, habit is the foundation of impact. And yet, we are drawn to the myth of breakthrough. We search for turning points. But Epictetus would ask, what if the turning point is not in the future, but in the present? What if the shift begins when you commit, here and now, to doing the next small thing with excellence? That is how the Stoic builds progress, not by waiting for momentum, but by making it, brick by brick, day by day. It may feel slow, it may feel invisible, but it is not meaningless. Marcus Aurelius never wrote for an audience. He wrote to steady himself, to return to what matters. And in doing so, he created a document that has guided human beings for nearly 2,000 years, not because he sought to be remembered, but because he practiced being present. This, then, is the antidote to the illusion of breakthrough, the choice to trade spectacle for substance, to choose consistency over chaos, to build a life not of momentary heights, but of enduring integrity. The Stoics offer us this invitation: forget the finish line, focus on the form, forget the applause, focus on the practice. Success is not something you will one day arrive at. It is something you quietly live over and over until it becomes you. And in this practice, something remarkable happens. You begin to need less. You begin to feel clearer. You begin to carry your purpose not as a burden, but as a rhythm, one that sustains you even when no one is watching. Especially then, when the Stoics spoke of success, they did not speak of it in terms of wealth, recognition, or conquest. They spoke of it in terms of formation, of shaping the self into something that no storm could overturn. Not something you achieve, but someone you become. In the Stoic worldview, true success is the result of internal refinement, an ongoing act of self-sculpting done not in bursts of inspiration, but through quiet, persistent training of the mind. At the core of this vision lies a radical proposal. What if the most important thing we can master in life is not the world, but ourselves? To the Stoics, the human being is composed of many parts: flesh, impulses, emotions, habits. But beneath it all, there is reason, a governing faculty, the ability to observe, to choose, to rise above instinct. And the measure of a person, they believed, lies in how well that reason is cultivated. Do we allow ourselves to be thrown around by every wave of circumstance, or do we build an inner lighthouse still, unmoved, watching the tides without becoming them? This inner stronghold, this citadel of the mind, is not constructed overnight. It is the product of practice, what the Stoics called ascesis. It is no coincidence that this word is also the root of ascetic, and yet the Stoics did not demand renunciation for its own sake. Their discipline was not about rejecting pleasure, but about preparing for unpredictability. They trained not because life is always difficult, but because difficulty reveals whether our minds have been trained. A soldier drills not for peacetime, but for when peace breaks. The Stoic, likewise, prepares not to avoid misfortune, but to meet it well. And so, day after day, the Stoic practices. They write. They reflect. They examine their thoughts. They rehearse adversity. They remind themselves that they control only their judgment and their choices, not their body, not the opinions of others, not their health, not even the hour of their death. This is not a denial of reality, but an embracing of it. A way to remove the illusion of control where it does not exist, so that they can exert it precisely where it does. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest exemplars of this path, wrote to himself each morning not to produce literature, but to refine his judgment. Today I shall meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil. This is not bitterness, it is preparation. He does not seek to change the world before changing himself. He does not pray to be spared difficulty, but to be equal to it. And in this posture he finds freedom not from hardship, but from its domination over him. Success, then, becomes something much quieter than what our modern world suggests. It is not a moment of applause, but a moment of clarity. Not the culmination of a project, but the correction of a reaction. Success is sitting still in traffic and choosing not to curse. Success is hearing criticism and listening rather than defending. Success is being interrupted in your work and choosing patience instead of resentment. These are not dramatic victories, but they are real. And repeated often enough, they become who you are. The Stoics were not naive. They knew how unpredictable the world could be. Earthquakes, exile, betrayal, loss. They did not expect to avoid these things. They expected to meet them. But they believed with deep conviction that the human spirit, when properly trained, could meet any hardship without becoming smaller, pettier, or crueler, and that, to them, was true success. Not avoiding the storm, but walking through it without losing your compass. There is a passage from Epictetus that embodies this perfectly. He writes, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Why? Because real improvement often looks invisible to others. It is not about gaining status. It is about shedding illusion. It is about choosing the difficult thought over the comforting one, the reflective pause over the immediate reaction. And in a world obsessed with appearance, that can look strange, but to the Stoic, it is the deepest kind of strength. In many ways, this vision runs counter to everything modern culture encourages. We are taught to seek results, to move fast, to collect external symbols of growth. But the Stoics point in the opposite direction. Don't chase growth, practice steadiness. Don't count achievements, cultivate presence. Don't aim for applause, aim for alignment with nature, with reason, with virtue, because that is the only kind of success that cannot be taken away. And so, the Stoic wakes each morning not asking, how much have I gained, but how have I lived? They end each night not with a checklist of completed tasks, but a quiet reflection. Where did I react poorly today? Where was I proud, or irritated, or fearful? Can I do better tomorrow? This is not perfectionism. It is progress, the slow, deliberate shaping of a self that can be trusted, not only by others, but by the person living inside it. It is in this slow accumulation of invisible choices that we find the heart of Stoic discipline. The willingness to get up again and return to the same small practices, not because they guarantee fame or success as the world sees it, but because they build something deeper, coherence between our ideals and our actions. A kind of inner architecture that no fire can burn down, that is success not once, but every day. The world may never notice, but you will. You'll feel it in the calm between triggers, in the quiet steadiness beneath stress, in the way you pause when others panic, in the way you offer kindness, not because it's earned, but because it is right. These are the fruits of discipline, not instant, not flashy, but enduring. And perhaps this is the final lesson. Success is not a moment of arrival. It is a rhythm, a life tuned to the frequency of reason, of virtue, of quiet clarity. Each breath, each thought, each act becomes an echo of the self you are building, and that self, shaped over time, becomes your true legacy. Not in the eyes of others, but in your own. Not in monuments, but in moments, the small ones, the repeated ones, the ones only you see. Success, as the Stoics saw it, does not arrive with fanfare. It does not appear in applause, headlines, or golden moments of triumph. It arrives in the quiet repetition of a single decision, to live rightly, to do what is just, even when no one notices, to return to the practice, even when no one rewards you. It is not something that happens to you. It is something that slowly happens within you. And like all things worth building, it takes time, it takes stillness, and it takes faith in the invisible. Today, in a world hungry for results, for visible transformation, for instant achievement, we are invited to take a different path, a gentler one, a deeper one that begins not in ambition, but in awareness, not in striving, but in returning to the breath, to the journal, to the morning walk, to the act of simply sitting with yourself and asking, what kind of person am I becoming? Because in the end, the only success worth pursuing is the one that remains when everything else falls away. When the spotlight fades, when the audience leaves, when the world grows quiet, what remains is who you are, and that is what the Stoics trained for, not a life without struggle, but a self that could remain whole through it. So today you don't need to chase a dream. You don't need to take a leap. You don't need to change everything. All you need to do is this: wake up, breathe, write something true. Read something wise, speak with kindness, practice patience, fail gently. Begin again, and again. This is not spectacular, but it is sacred. And in that quiet, you may come to realize success was never a moment, it was a direction, a discipline, a habit of the soul. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation.